Hope everyone had a Merry Christmas and on to a Happy New Year. Rob, we nearly crossed paths in New York yesterday. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, man. Good week, good weekend. Interesting little Saturday slate we had there, but didn't hate it. It was interesting and it was fun, and some more games Sunday and Monday. So had a great time, getting away from work a little bit, enjoying the family time, and it was a nice little refresher. So heading into the New Year week and looking for some of the same. So how about you? How was your weekend?
Oh, it was great, man. A lot of good family time. Girls had a great Christmas. It's fun watching them open gifts and stuff. Like just getting to play with the toys with them and everything. So it was a good time. Good family time as always. Went to see the Rockettes
Good,
yesterday,
man.
so good show. Good close to Christmas there, and on to New Year, on to Week 17, and we're actually going to revisit a little segment that we had going earlier in the year before we moved on to some other discussion points, and that was going over who was for real, who we thought was a fraud, and who was for debate. So we're going to revisit that, not to call out who's for real, fraud, or debate at this moment. It's more just to see, what took place. So the last time we did this, Rob, was between week 7 and 8, and we had a good bit of movement. And I think this list pretty much remains unchanged. Honestly, we had Bills, Chiefs, Eagles. You had the Cowboys falling off of that list. I think Bills, Chiefs, Eagles are a lock and have been proven correct over the course of the season. Eagles desperately need that bye to get healthy, sure. What about Dallas? Do you view them as a for real team now that we're going into the last couple weeks of the season, or are they still in that for debate section for you?
I think they are for real. I
Okay.
think I kind of went back and forth on them earlier in the year. There was a point in the season where they were clearly on that list for me, and then some stuff went wrong. They lost a couple of games they probably should have won, and then they fell off that list. But I've seen enough from them. I've seen a really good defense earlier in the year, and they're starting to pick it up again now. And then I've seen an offense that's been able to put up a lot of points. So their win last week against the Eagles, I know it was without Jalen Hurts, but honestly, Gardner Minshew is a really, really good backup, and he's a phenomenal. I shouldn't say phenomenal, but he's a very competent quarterback. Any team, he could start for any team, and they would stay competitive, in my opinion. I think he's actually that good. So I think that's still a really solid win for the Cowboys, and helps their confidence going into the playoffs. They got the Titans and the Commanders the last 2 weeks. I think it's not totally. I mean, the Eagles have to lose both games, which I don't see happening, but the Cowboys are in regardless. They're likely not going to win the division, but I think they'll actually finish out going 2-0 unless they rest guys week 18. Depending on how the Commanders' playoff situation looks, based on the rest of the NFC, I think the Cowboys, regardless, they're in, and I think they're in a good spot. I think they got a lot of confidence, and that win versus the Eagles was really big for them. So yeah, I would say they're for real. They'll go back into that category for me.
Yeah, we even talked about Gardner Minshew potentially leading the Eagles to a victory going into that game. It felt like a spot where Dallas had to have it, had to bounce back after a couple tough losses, specifically that pick six that lost the game against Jacksonville the previous week. So they really did need that, just really as a confidence boost and to regain a little bit of momentum heading towards the playoffs. I'm with you on the fact that Minshew can and should win at least one game over the next couple of weeks. They're saying Hurts could play week 17. Honestly, let him get healthy. You got Lane Johnson. You got to get healthy. Eagles desperately need to get a win and head towards that bye week. So Dallas back in the for real column. The other one that I think you're going to have a lock as a for real here is going to be San Francisco and then Cincinnati. Give me your thoughts on where you sit on these two teams. They were in that for debate section. San Francisco doing what they do, getting hot over the last couple months of the season. Brock Purdy doing his thing. Cincinnati has shook off that Super Bowl hangover, and you have been high on them for quite some time, including predicting winning 5 or 6 games in a row, or really needing to win those 5 or 6 games. And I think they're on a 6, 7 game win streak at this point, looking hot, battling for that number 2, number 3 seed in the AFC, potentially even an outside shot. They could sneak into the number 1 seed as well, but I'm not sure I can envision that happening for them. But Bills Bengals actually play Monday night this week. So they could tie things up with the Bills with the win this week. So Bengals have really turned it around. I believe they were sitting at 0-2 earlier this season, and now they're potentially in that for real column. You've been high on them. Give me your thoughts on where the Bengals sit heading into the last couple weeks of the season alongside the 49ers.
I love the Bengals. Straight up, like have been really high on them all season. Didn't give up on them after they had a rocky start, and I'm glad I didn't because they're really proving me right going into the later weeks of the year. Their defense is solid enough, and their offense is just so fun. Like, I mean, Burrow's phenomenal. Chase and Higgins are one of, if not the best, wide receiver combos in the NFL. Mixon's really good. Pirine has really showed to be a solid RB2. And then offensive line is getting a little bit better. So I love the Bengals. I love their odds. I think this is kind of similar to last year, but even better. I think they're in a better situation than they were last year when they had that Super Bowl run. I think they're clicking even more now than they were last year, and I think they'll be in a better spot. I think they were like a 5 or 6 seed going into the playoffs last year and had to go on the road in all their playoff games. They may get a couple home games this year, this playoffs, depending on how week 17 and 18 go. And like you said, they can tie it up with the Bills this week for the 1 seed. Now, it's dependent on the Chiefs. The Chiefs played the Broncos this week, which I think the Chiefs will win, which will put them in first place. But if the Bills lose, the Bengals and the Bills are tied for second place, and you never know what's going to happen week 18. So, and the Bengals would actually have the tiebreaker versus the Chiefs because they beat them this year. So, if the Bengals win out, if the Chiefs go 1-1, the Bengals have an outside shot at getting that 1 seed and the playoffs going through Cincinnati, which would be huge for them. I actually have them. It's funny you asked me about the Bengals and the 49ers. I have the Bengals going to the Super Bowl out of the AFC. That's my prediction right now as of week 17,
really?
And I'm going to stick to it. I think they look like the most complete team. Yeah, I do, and I think they'll finish the job. I do. I know I've been back and forth on them and the 49ers and even the Bills. I had the Bills for a while there this year, but the Bills have been a little bit up and down. They're still getting wins. They still look like a really dominant team, but I feel like they just haven't been as consistent and haven't looked as dominant as they have earlier in the year. And the Bengals just look really good. They're red hot right now. It's actually crazy to me that they're potentially not even going to win their division. They have 2 tough matchups coming up the last 2 weeks, and the Ravens have 2 cupcakes. So if Lamar Jackson comes back, I'm sorry, the Ravens would have the Bengals last week. So this week is the week where the Ravens have an easy matchup. They play against the Steelers. So that's a very winnable game for the Ravens. But on the flip side, the Steelers do need a win. So I think that could be an interesting one as well. But to take it over to the NFC, the 49ers, I love them. I love their defense is just incredible. Their defenses look better than any offense I've seen all year. I know we continually say this is an offensive league, but the 49ers defense looks incredible. Nick Bosa, I mean, I don't have enough good things to say about him. Their secondary, their linebacking crew, like everyone just looks so on page. They just look like they're just relentless. I mean, they just look like a team that puts fear into the eyes of their offensive opponent. So that's a team to be reckoned with. They're on an 8-game win streak. I mean, they're just looking really, really good. So Brock Purdy has kind of showed, and we've said it the last 2 weeks, that he could be enough, to take them on a run. Like he's, like we say, like similar to the Jets, where a really good defense needs and an offense that has good playmakers. They just need like a competent quarterback. They need a average to slightly below average quarterback. And that could be enough to take them, over the hump and into a playoff run. And potentially, my prediction is that they go to the Super Bowl out of the NFC. I think they're that good. I think their offense is that good. And I think Brock Purdy is enough. So whatever you want to take from that little breakdown there, you can pull that I have the Bengals versus the 49ers in the Super Bowl as of going into week 17. And again, that's if there's no injuries or anything else like that. That's my prediction as of right now, and I'm going to stick to it unless I see anything drastically different. I think the Bengals is a little bit of a stretch as opposed to the 49ers. I think a lot of people are on the 49ers now. But in my circles, I've said I like the Bengals to go to the Super Bowl, and people have kind of shut it down. So I don't think that's a hot take, but I think it's a lukewarm take. I think people are not fully on the Bengals like I am, but I'm there with them. I think they're that good. So it's going to be fun to watch everything unfold these last 2 weeks and then see where the chips fall in the playoffs as far as seeding and everything.
Joe Burrow has been the highest graded passer since week 9, highest graded overall quarterback since week 9, according to Pro Football Focus. He is now moved up into the position as the number 2 overall graded quarterback on the season. Rob, after about week 2 or 3, we were talking about the Bengals. There was a lot of back and forth. Your predictions on them proved correct with them getting it together and making a run at the playoffs. I was a little more hesitant. I thought they'd get to about 10 wins, finish the season right at 10 wins, and potentially get that 6th, 7th seed or even miss out on a wild card spot because of the difficulty of the AFC and how it was shaping out then. We've seen some teams collapse. We've seen them continually improve. So it's hard to argue against your points there, including Joe Burrow. He's 2nd overall in passing yards this season. He's 2nd in touchdowns. He's 2nd in completion percentage. He's also 4th in touchdown percentage as well. Joe Burrow has really lit it up over the last few weeks. Do you recall in that week 3 conversation where we were talking about the issues they were having with the offensive line and just him being able to get the ball out of his hands? They were going with a lot of empty sets. I was reading a lot about how they were having issues protecting him again, and he couldn't get the ball to his receivers downfield because they weren't protecting him at all. They didn't really have an inline tight end. They didn't have a backpack there. They were going with a lot of empty sets, and you could feel the tension between him and Zach Taylor. It was visible when you were watching the game, and you really haven't heard much about it since then. It was a little rocky for them for a few weeks, but over the last 6 or 7, they've really gotten it together, and they look like a scary, scary team come January. They've locked up that playoff spot, trying now to win the division. If they do finish at that 2nd or 3rd seed and they're able to avoid potentially Baltimore and the LA Chargers, I think that could really prove fortunate for them and pave the way for another potential Super Bowl appearance. We'll see what happens. The Niners, I could see them getting that NFC Championship. I just have less faith overall in Brock Purdy. He certainly looked good, but he's been hyper efficient. They've been able to draw things up for him. I think he's throwing a touchdown every 105 yards, which is some of the most efficient football we've seen. I think eventually that's got to expire, and I think they end up falling just short. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the NFC, we don't really believe in Minnesota enough to make a run. I'm not going to buy into Dallas ever as a Dallas fan because I won't let them do that to me. So it's either them or Philly, because Tampa Bay, I think, have just moved on from them being able to make that run just because of what their scheme looks like. Like they just don't look like they have an edge at all. They look slow offensively. The defense is fine. So I think they could potentially make a little bit of a run just based off their defense. But offensively, the scheme looks terrible, looks predictable. Even watching on the TV, like you just kind of know what's about to happen. Like you can feel a turnover coming. It's pretty bad watching them. And I think we could almost put them into what ended up being fraudulent. But enough about these for real teams as well. I'm going to quickly touch on the frauds that we were talking about that clearly prove true. I don't think there's any arguments here on them at all. They are the Titans, Falcons, and Seahawks. Falcons were the easiest prediction of all just because of how lucky they had gotten. Since that show, they were 4-4. They are now 5-10. And Marcus Mariota quitting on the team, apparently. I don't know if you saw some weird clips from Arthur Smith there, but I don't think he's a good coach. Came into the season, I thought they were potentially going to have the number 1 pick, but the Texans were able to run away with that one. But they may not win a game the rest of the year. They got the Ravens this week, so they may finish at 5-12. Not shocked there. That was an easy call. Titans, even before Tannehill got hurt, we talked about them being fraudulent, but Mike Vrabel is a great coach. We want to give credit where it's due. Same with Seattle. They were overperforming expectations. Geno Smith and that schedule has gotten a little tougher. But Geno has continued to play pretty well. They just lost some close games to some tough teams. Seattle looks like they may end up missing the playoffs, but we called them as fraudulent at 5-3, mainly because of how they were overperforming their expectations to date. I would put, we didn't really even have watched it in the conversation. Giants were in for debate. I think we went back and forth on whether or not they were frauds only because of the lack of talent. Not that they're fooling anyone, but I think it's just you can't see them making a run, period, end of story. Any agreements or disagreements there before we kind of move on to these other teams that we want to talk about?
No, I'm in pretty much full agreement there. I think it touches on a lot of the points we made earlier in the year that we weren't much believers. The Titans, I think we called it. We kind of like they ride Derrick Henry in the beginning of the year. He's still playing pretty well now, but it feels like the wheels fall off the closer they get to playoffs, and that's kind of proven to be true this year again. They might not even make playoffs now. The Jaguars have kind of sneaked up and taken lead in that division, or they're tied for the division. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens there. The Seahawks, I think a lot of the fraudulent calls weeks ago were related around Geno Smith. I think this year, coming into the year, no one had high expectations for the Seahawks. I know in my fantasy football drafts, I stayed away from Seahawks receivers because I didn't think Geno could throw the ball that well. He's obviously proven me wrong and us wrong in certain facets of the game. He's had a really good year, but again, I don't think they're going to make any type of run, even if they do get in, which feels unlikely at this point. So no, and the Falcons, I don't need to really speak on them. They're done. That was kind of just felt like a fluke in the beginning of the year. That whole division has just been super weird the whole year. The Bucks have I'm not even going to get into it. The Bucks, Panthers, Saints, and Falcons. I mean, the Falcons are 2 games behind the Bucks, and it feels like they're 100 games behind. Like it's an awful division. I think the Bucks are going to get out of it. They're going to win the division, but I don't think they're going to make any noise in the playoffs as they have in the past couple of years. So, not worried about them. Not worried about the Falcons, any of them. So, no, not much to long story short, not much more to say about those teams. I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with those earlier in the year. So not necessarily glad to see that we were right, but for frauds, but I guess we know a little bit about football to make those predictions. So that's a little confidence booster there.
That's it, folks. Call it a show. We're confident. Move on. I think with the Falcons, I just think Arthur Smith is so bad. I mean, I don't know if anyone was buying into him at all, as much as, I'd like for our pod to take some credit for that. I don't know if anyone's really buying into him. It's just, I think the last 2 years there has been brutal to watch. I know they had Matt Ryan last year and they had Mariota this year, but man, I mean, it's not exciting. They don't look competitive for most of the game, and early in the year, they really just kind of made a run in the fourth quarter and were able to eke out some wins. And they're not that talented. They got good pass catchers, but they don't even use them that well. So, it's a mess over there. But I'm glad we were able to see that one from a mile away. But let's move into some of these other playoff predictions as well, man, because I want to continue talking about the playoffs here. Let's hit on the NFC. I know you've got a couple points you want to make, and then we'll kind of wrap up the show towards the end for the folks, kind of talking about a couple offseason moves for some teams as well, just because we want to touch on those. Like what do you do? What do the Rams do with just the limited cap space, lack of draft picks with Baker, Stafford, et cetera? What do they end up doing? What do a couple of these other teams end up doing? But for now, let's stick with these NFC playoffs. So, right now I see in your predictions here, you're sticking with who's obviously we got the teams that are locked in: Eagles, Cowboys, Niners, Vikings, and then you're rounding it out with Bucks, Giants. And then give me your thoughts on Packers and Lions, because it looks like you're a little conflicted here. Giants, I think, have, like you said, have about an 80% chance of making it. We can't see Bucks and Panthers play this weekend. I just can't see the Bucks still losing that division, no matter how bad they look. It looks like you agree. So Kind of round us out here on the NFC, talking, Giants being on the bubble. Looks like they're going to hang on. Are you convinced they're going to do it? And then Packers with some life here after just being dead with like a 7% chance to make the playoffs just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so I think the Giants get in. Some crazy stuff has to happen for the Giants not to get in. I don't foresee that happening. So I think you can kind of pencil in the Giants into the playoff race, locking up a spot there. And then for the Lions and Packers, it's totally dependent on, I think, week 18, where they play each other. So right now, the Lions have a 24% chance to make the playoffs. The Packers have a 27% chance to make the playoffs. It all comes down to that week 18 game, in my opinion. Like, I don't think the Seahawks are going to take that last wild card spot. I think it's going to come down to the Packers and the Lions. And I think it's all going to come down to who wins week 18, winning you're in type situation. And that's going to kind of round out the NFC playoff picture, in my opinion. I think there's a couple other teams, like I said, the Seahawks, the Commanders you can consider in that realm, I guess. I'm not going to count the Panthers and the Saints. I think they're both out at this point. So I think it comes down to the Lions and the Packers in that week 18 game. If I had to predict, gosh, it's so hard because I really like what I've seen out of the Lions. They kind of laid an egg this past weekend, and the Packers do look good. If I had to take a team to make the playoffs, I would take the Packers right now. But again, I think they struggled with them early in the year, so that's going to be a fun one to see what happens to round out the NFC. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. I think Giants are in, 92% chance to make the playoffs, according to the NFL playoff predictor, and I will take the Packers to make it over the Lions. But again, it comes down to that last game. So Lions could definitely win that game. For right now, my gut tells me Packers.
We've seen the Panthers rotate weeks, laying an egg, and then being super competitive and winning a game. That's kind of been their forte since Steve Wilkes took over, and they did it again against the Lions. Lions have been one of the hottest teams in the league, and the Panthers, I think we called it the week before where we were like, yeah, the Steelers are going to beat them. They're just not going to be that consistent. And then going into this game, they show up and hang 37 on the Lions, beat them 37-23. So that just seems to be their calling card, is laying an egg one week and then looking like, a playoff contender the next week. So I'm not going to read into that too much because Detroit has been probably one of the hottest teams in the NFL over the last month. And sometimes that just happens. I try not to read too much into one game. The Panthers were just trying to keep their playoff hopes alive. They had to win to have really any shot at potentially winning the division, making this an interesting matchup against the Bucs this week. So I think there's a lot more that goes into that just from a mental and preparation standpoint. Yeah, the Lions probably should have been more competitive, but those are some of the reasons why I'm not going to read too much into that loss. But nonetheless, they're going to have to beat the Bears this week, who we know is pretty competitive, and they can put up some serious points. So the Lions are going to have to put up some points. I believe that game is actually in Detroit in a dome, and it looks like it is. The over-under is currently sitting right at about 51.5, 52. So that's going to be a fun one. That's going to be a shootout. They're going to have to hang some points because I think Justin Fields and the Bears will continue being a bit of an offensive juggernaut in the back half of the season. So the Bears are tough. They can be a tough out for some of these middle-of-the-road teams, even some of the better ones. So it's going to be a tough game for Detroit this week. I do think they win it out. We've got pretty much a matchup against the Packers the next week for that final wild card spot. Because to me, the Packers, they got to get some confidence and they got to beat the Vikings this week. Like, if they don't, it's just they've done this multiple times this season where they look good and then they completely let you down. Coming off of back-to-back wins, I don't think they've won 3 in a row since they were 3-1. I think they started out the season 0-1, won 3 in a row, and it's just been loss, win, loss, win since then. So it's been tough to watch. So, the Packers, they look like they were starting to figure it out a little bit last week throughout the game, but they still had Rodgers just doesn't look that accurate like he normally does. Missed a guy deep on that 4th down who was wide open. Some of their play calling is a little gimmicky. I think LaFleur has been found out a little bit, and we do see that happen sometimes where he's had such an incredible run. It looks like he's kind of been found out. He's, in the offseason, he's one of those guys that may have to revisit that, get creative again, and they'll be fine long term, I think. And but they just look gimmicky sometimes. And the Vikings are 11-0 in one-score games. That metric regresses one way or the other year over year. So the Vikings better enjoy it, because you're not going 11-0 in one-score games year over year. So the Vikings have certainly been extremely fortunate. So this is really an opportunistic time for the Packers to sneak into the playoffs. And I'll be honest, I don't really want to play Green Bay in the playoffs, because they're probably playing Minnesota at that 2 seed. That's not really something I want to do if I'm Minnesota. So I would want to take care of business here and try to eliminate Green Bay, because I would not want Green Bay coming to town in the wild card round if I'm them. So that's kind of my thoughts on the NFC playoff picture, and where I see it shaping out, and just kind of how some of these teams should or should not approach this week. And then on the AFC side, we got Bills, Chiefs, Bengals sitting there with the 1, 2, and 3 seed. We've already talked about that a good bit. That Bills-Bengals game is going to be a great matchup. Do you actually have a winner in that game? Bengals have been super hot, but kind of feels like we've started to move on or forget about the Bills just a little bit. Forget about them as in, even you mentioned they're not as dominant as they were earlier in the season. Just straight up, give me a prediction on that game. Do you think the Bengals beat the Bills this week?
Yes, I will take the Bengals this week. I think the Bengals show up in big games. I think the Bills are still very good, but I'm going to stick with the Bengals based off my earlier predictions for them to make a serious run. And I think it continues with a win against probably one of the big bads in the AFC. So I'll take the Bills this weekend, and it's in Cincinnati, so I think that helps them as well.
So where do you see this AFC playoff picture shaping out from here?
So I think Bills, Chiefs, Chargers, Bengals, Ravens have already locked up a spot, right? So that leaves the Jaguars, Dolphins, Jets, Steelers, Titans, in my opinion, on the bubble. So the only reason, I guess, so that's 5 out of 7. So 2 more get in. Yeah. So I think I would have the Dolphins here. I think we need to see.
I think that Jags-Titans game, I think the Jags have a 4% shot at getting the wild card, but really that Jags-Titans game next week is for the AFC South. So that final wild card spot, even though there's less than a 5% chance the Jags get it, is really not up for grabs with them. It's Jags-Titans next week for that 4 seed, and then I think you have Dolphins, Jets, Steelers here. I'm not sure. Are the Pats still in it mathematically? I mean, they play the Dolphins this week. I guess they win, kind of.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm not really a believer in them, and maybe that's just my Jets fandom coming out. But
fair.
I think I don't think the Pats are very good. I think they shot themselves in the foot against the Raiders as well. So that was abysmal ending, and I think that's going to come back to bite them in the playoff race. But if we just keep it right now for Dolphins, Jets, Steelers, it's again, I think if I take my fandom out of it as a Jets fan, I would have the Dolphins in there. The Dolphins have 1 game up on the Jets, but we need to see what happens with Tua, because they're talking about, everyone but the Dolphins are talking about how Tua needs to potentially sit out the rest of the year because he's in concussion protocol again. I was talking about this with my family last night. The guy, like this, it's becoming scary at this point. Like, it's almost like every time he hits the grass or the turf, he's hitting his head first, and it's just leading to more problems. So they need to seriously consider his health, long-term health, because he's only 23, 24 years old. They need to consider his long-term health outside of football when it comes to playing him or sitting him rest of the year. Teddy Bridgewater is not the worst backup quarterback. I think he's able to keep them competitive, but it just comes down to Tua's health at this point. I think as a Jets fan, Jets fans all around, I think you never root for injuries. Obviously, I never do root for injuries, but if Tua goes down, it definitely helps the Jets because they do play Week 18. I think it's a very similar situation to the Packers and the Lions in the NFC, where Week 18 could come down to a win and you're in type situation. Now, for the Jets to make the playoffs, the Patriots have to lose one game out of their last two, at least. And the Patriots play the Dolphins this week. So, again, is Tua playing or not? And then they play the Bills next week. Now, the only good thing about the Patriots playing the Bills Week 18, where Week 18 is typically, in the past years, Week 17. The last week of the year has always been, if depending on your playoff situation, if you're in, you sit starters and you just rest up for the playoffs. Now, if the Bills win this week versus the Bengals, that changes Week 18 because if they win this week and assume the Chiefs win, now the Bills and the Chiefs are outright fighting for that one spot in that first round bye in the playoffs. They're going to have to play all starters against the Patriots Week 18 if that's the case. So if the Bengals win this week, that actually doesn't help the Jets because the Bills might sit their players versus the Patriots. And I think the Bills are more likely to beat the Patriots than, in Buffalo than the Dolphins are to beat the Patriots in New England this week. So a lot has to happen still in that AFC East picture, which has probably been the most interesting and exciting division in football this year. So I can't necessarily make a pick just yet, but I mean, we know Bills, Chiefs, Chargers, Bengals, Ravens, Jags/Titans are in already. So it's really just fighting for that last wild card spot, like you said. And I think it all comes down to, I think you get a really good picture of who's going to get in after this week. It might come down to that win and in game. It might come down to Jets are completely eliminated if they lose this week to the Seahawks. So there's a lot riding on this weekend's games. And thankfully the Jets have Mike White back. Zach Wilson's done in New York. I think there's already reports coming out that they're moving on from him next year. But Jets fans are happy to see Mike White back because I think he keeps them competitive. Similar to a Brock Purdy situation in San Francisco, where you just need average to below average competent quarterback if you have a roster that good around you. So Jets fans definitely excited to see him back, and I think it definitely gives them a better chance at playoffs, even though their playoff percentage right now to make playoffs is 15%. A lot can change with the New England loss and one more Jets win. So stuff has to happen, but I think it's not like totally out of question. I think it's definitely possible, especially with the Bills situation. So we'll see how this all plays out. But yeah, that's where I'm kind of rolling up in the AFC playoff prediction. So if you have any other thoughts there?
Well, who do you have in the championship games, actually? That's kind of what I want. So we're going to have an actual bracket in a couple weeks. So we'll have actual matchups. But if you have the Bengals and Niners meeting in the Super Bowl, who do they beat to get there in the conference championship games? Because you're leaving out, because that makes, 2 years in a row here, we got potentially Bills, Chiefs having to play each other in the round before, or Bengals going through both of them. So who do they beat in the conference championship rounds for both parties?
Well, I guess it all depends on seeding, right? So depending on the seeding, how it comes out, I think a lot changes. One of those three teams, Bengals, Bills, Chiefs, are going to have to play each other before the conference championship, right? So that's really where it comes down to. If the Bills play the Chiefs, I would probably take the Bills. If the Bills play the Bengals, I'm taking the Bengals, like I've said. And if the Bengals play the Chiefs, I'll take the Bengals. So it's kind of hard to make that prediction out of the AFC just yet because we don't know the seeding yet. NFC, I would say, I'll be boring and say 49ers, Eagles. I think they're better than every other team. I think 49ers and Eagles are tier one of the playoff teams. Cowboys are right on the bubble there. And then I'm not really a big believer in the Vikings. I think the point I want to make about the Vikings is I feel like if you look at their schedule for the whole year, it's like there's been 2 games, I think, this whole year that have been decided by more than, double digits. So every other game has been decided by single digits or 1 score. So it feels like massively inconsistent, but like you said, they're getting the wins in those close games. So they play up to their competition when they play teams like the Bills, but then they play down to their competition when they play the lower end teams. The Commanders of the world and whoever else they've had close games with this year. So it's just, they're a weird team. Like, they play up to their competition, but they also play down. So I think that's going to come back to bite them. I think I can't really decide if that's a good thing or not. Like, Vikings games, you have to assume that every game is going to be competitive at this point because of that situation. But eventually it's not going to fall their way. Eventually they're not going to be able to come back from a 33-point deficit. They're not going to have Josh Allen fumble on the 1-yard line and cause mayhem in the last minute of a game. Like, they're getting a lot of breaks, and that's going to run out at some point. There's going to be a break that doesn't go their way, and that might be the end of their season. So that's why they're like, it feels like they're on thin ice. That's why I'm not going to have them in the NFC Championship. So as of now, I'd have 49ers, Eagles, and then Bengals and whoever wins that other, 1-2 game. So I need to see the playoff picture first. I think once we have that in round 1, I'll be able to answer this question a little bit better. But as of now, yeah, I'm going to stick with the Bengals. I think if people had to rank the AFC right now, I think it would go probably Chiefs 1, Bills 2, Bengals 3, in my opinion. I would rank it almost the opposite, where Bengals, Bills, Chiefs 1, 2, 3. So yeah, I think a lot still has to happen. I think we need to see what the playoffs really rolls up to be, and I think that big questions are answered this week when the Bengals play the Bills, and we'll see what kind of happens there. Who's going to be in the 1 seed picture, and who's could potentially get bounced from that conversation.
The interesting thing about all this as well is Washington. We haven't really talked a ton about Washington for good reason, but I mean, if they beat Cleveland this week, they are still holding on to that 7th seed. And then the Lions and Packers will need them to lose. So they would either need the Giants to lose the next couple weeks, which Giants got the Colts this week. I've got this weird feeling Colts keep it close, potentially edge it out, just because Giants aren't a team that can really blow you out of the water and run away with it. But they kind of need the Giants to lose back-to-back games. You don't know if the Eagles are going to be resting starters. Washington plays Dallas in that last week. So if Washington and the Giants can win this week against inferior opponents, they could be playing divisional rivals that are resting starters, i.e. Eagles, Cowboys, because they're potentially going to be locked up. Eagles win this week. They're going to be resting. Cowboys at that point would have the 5th seed locked up. No shot at the 1 seed. So you get Washington Giants winning this week. They are playing divisional rivals who are likely resting starters. And then Lions Packers, that game is, one that the winner could potentially not even get into the playoffs. So we've got some interesting scenarios coming up this week. That Washington-Cleveland game is one to watch. Cleveland's officially eliminated from the playoffs. We know in what disarray the Colts are. By the way, update on that 4th quarter stat. Saw a bunch of tweets last night. Jeff Saturday has officially been outscored in the 4th quarter 90-9. So just abysmal 4th quarter coaching coming from that. But I mean, what do you expect? He's took on, never coached before, came in middle of the season. It kind of shows like just situational preparation. Like there's just so much that goes into that. I think he's done a couple things that have been solid, but just overall, you could see the inexperience there. But nonetheless, you could see anyone really competing against the Giants and Commanders. You could also see them both winning out, and you may not have Detroit or Green Bay in it. So that's something to look out for as well. We'll, of course, keep close eye on it. But that's kind of it for me on the playoff scenarios. I think what's interesting is Pittsburgh could be Baltimore. Pittsburgh is, I think, still technically in it. I don't see them getting in it. But there's 2 things we talked about with Pittsburgh and Miami early in the season, probably week 3, week 4. And it was, Tomlin always will grind his way to at least 500, no matter how bad or inexperienced the Steelers are. And here they are, still somehow in the wild card race. I don't think they're going to get in. I think it's such a slim chance it's not going to happen. But the fact that Tomlin has them in it at this point is just another incredible feat by him. If they could just get, if Kenny Pickett could develop or hit or something like that, I think you're going to see the Steelers return to being a powerhouse in the AFC over the next couple of years. That's a big if. It's obviously dependent on the quarterback. Miami's the other one we talked about, Rob, when they were off to that 3-0 start. And we say here, and I said, oh, man, it just feels like they're perpetually cursed with that 500. Like, it just feels like they're going to somehow end up at 9-8 or 8-9 and potentially just miss out on the playoffs at the 8 seed, because no matter how good we've seen them in years past, they just always somehow seem to do that. Like, at the time, there was no rhyme or reason. They're still one of the most explosive offenses, but some way, somehow, Miami just finds their way to 500. It's the most unbelievably mind-numbing thing that it consistently happens year over year. I feel for Dolphins fans there, because it's truly been a fun team to watch. Like, Miami could be a real threat in the playoffs. So those were a couple that I was thinking about over the course of these games of the weekend, where I was like, wow, that was, we were kind of saying it like jokingly, like, you had Steelers at 0-3, you had Miami at 3-0. It's like, it just feels like these teams are both going to end up right around 500 just because of Tomlin and then the Dolphins organization. And nonetheless, it looks like it may happen. We'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But that was one I was saying about quite a bit. But let's move on. Do you have anything else on the playoff picture? Like, I'm all set. I'm good. We'll move on to our last couple thoughts here.
No, I think it's just funny. It's a funny stat that we constantly see the Steelers. I mean, Tomlin's never had an under 500 season, I don't think. So he's fighting for his life to keep that stat alive. And the Dolphins are the Dolphins. I mean, they've really caught injury bug at the quarterback position, which hurt them a lot earlier in the year. It seems like it's hurting them now, potentially if Tua's out again. But they were 3-0, and then he went down, and they went 3-3. So they dropped 3 in a row that they could have probably won had he been healthy. So that definitely didn't help them earlier in the year. But those are just things you have to deal with in the football season. So not much more to say there. I think, again, they're on that bubble. I really do. I said it 2 weeks ago. I'll continue to say it. I think it's going to come down to week 18 with the Jets. And I will stick to that unless something drastically changes this week, such as the Jets loss. But I think it's going to come down to that, and we'll see. Dolphins don't really have an easy road the rest of the way. I mean, considering they have the Patriots this week and the Jets next week, so they're going to have to win both of those to get in, probably. So, or at least one of them. So, I don't know. Steelers are just weird. I don't believe in the Steelers. I think their defense is good. I don't think their offense is particularly good, but
No.
We'll see. I mean, if they get in, I don't think that's really a scary team to face, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't think they're scary to face either. They're just always a tough out. It's just interesting to still see them in it. And I can see them beating the Ravens this week. That's always a tough game. So playoffs will be fun nonetheless. There's certainly going to be a lot to talk about moving forward. Next week, we'll potentially have almost every position locked up, including seating, except for a couple. So, and then we'll start really looking towards the playoffs. But on these last couple topics, I know you kind of were questioning, what do they do with Baker Mayfield, like the Rams? Let's talk about a couple of these other teams that are completely eliminated. Nathaniel Hackett's been fired. The Broncos are fighting on the sidelines. I mean, I don't know if you saw some of those videos from the weekend, but it's bad. Yeah. And then Baker, like, do you think he's salvageable? I know that was something you wanted to discuss here. So is he salvageable? Does he stay with the Rams? Like, what does that situation look like? I think a backup position is good for Baker that, like, is in a good offense. If they can get him cheap enough, limited cap space, limited draft picks, I think that could be good. I'm not sure it will actually happen in LA just because of how much rebuilding they're going to have to do. But, I mean, he seems like he could fit as a good backup plan in Sean McVay's offense.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? I mean, first overall pick a couple years ago. He's obviously had his struggles, in Denver, or sorry, not in Denver. What am I saying? In Cleveland. And then he was pretty brutal in Carolina. Once he left, it seemed like they really picked it up, which is interesting. I wonder what was going on there. But I think a backup would be perfect for him. I think he'd be one of the better backups in the NFL if that's the case, if they can get him for the right price. But right now, it feels like Baker's playing the way Baker wants to play. Rams are totally out of playoff contention. They've been out for a while. They're probably one of the worst teams in the league, and they signed him just pretty much to get ticket sales. In my opinion, like if they had not been competitive, people were just going to give up on them completely. But he's keeping them competitive, and they just won a big game last week against Denver. I mean, they blew them out of the water, put up 54 points, I think, something like that. So, yeah, I think he'd be a fantastic backup. I think Stafford's obviously the clear choice to roll out their week 1 next year. But I think, again, Baker's playing loose. He's playing with nothing to lose. If they win, they win. If they lose, they lose. There's no real impact on what happens at this point, sitting at 5-10. So, I think that's the sweet spot Baker wants to be in. Unfortunately, that's not a spot that you can be in if you want to be competitive in this league. I think certain guys like Mahomes and Josh Allen and Burrow, those type of players can play very loose. Their job security is as good as anyone, and they have the skill set to play that way. But Baker Mayfield right now, I think he's playing his best because there's no expectation. There's no playoff implications at all. Again, if they win, they win. If they lose, they lose. And I think that's where he thrives. Feels like more of like a college atmosphere where he was just super loose. He knew he's the best player on the field. Right now, he can have that mindset that he's the best player on the field, even though he's probably not. But that certainly helps goes a long way in just being confident and how that impacts your performance. So I think he's doing a great job there right now. I don't think that's a long-term solution by any means. But again, I mean, if he's a backup, that's one of the best backups in the league. And honestly, backup quarterback's the best position in sports. So he would be sitting pretty out there in LA. So that might not be a bad move for the Rams to take care of in the offseason. But I could easily see him shopping around because a lot of teams need quarterbacks. And if they feel like they can get him for the right price, they might make an offer. And the Rams might not want to meet that offer. So there's going to be a lot of Baker Mayfield talk this offseason, I think, surprisingly, because you kind of felt like his career was dying in Carolina, and this little 2-game stretch has kind of revived him a bit. And I think for the right reason. I think he's pretty good. I don't think he's a long-term solution for anyone, but I think he keeps teams competitive because he does have a good skill set. He is confident. I think in the right locker room with the right situation, he would thrive. But right now, it's again, I solely think it's based on him just playing loose and with no expectation. So not much more to say there other than that.
Yeah, I think you're right. He may generate some buzz, but I think we got enough of a sample size where he does not need to be signed as the starter. He could be signed as a backup or maybe competing with, maybe competing with someone like a Jimmy G or something like that. I don't know, but you're not winning a Super Bowl with him. You're probably not making the playoffs with him as your starter, but I do think he's a good insurance policy for teams that want to be able to make a run. If you're the Rams, keep your season alive. But kudos to them, honestly, for showing up, continuing to fight. Like I do always credit that coaching staff there. Kingsbury, I think he's about to join Nathaniel Hackett on the market. With Kyler Murray out, I know they lost him, but even before, like we talked about Kingsbury potentially losing his job, and the Bears got to get Fields some serious help over the course of the offseason. Like Fields has popped early in the season. He was potentially not it. And since about week 6, 7, 8, he has really come a long ways as they've catered that offense to him. He's got to improve as a passer, but they have shown that if you cater an offense to him, he can look pretty good. The Bears last year added to their defense. It did not help him out at all. So I think organizationally, the Bears are a complete joke, and they've got to build around Fields. But I don't really I don't really trust them to do it as we shift towards the offseason. So, those are kind of my predictions. I think Arthur Smith is going to get one more year. I think he needs to go, and I think he needs to be fired in the next week or so. But I think they may give him one more year. Kingsbury, I think, is actually going to go. Hackett's already gone. And then in the AFC, I'd be surprised if Lovie Smith stayed in Houston. I think they're kind of hoping they could maybe hire an offensive mind or something like that and rebuild with a young quarterback. Denver, I mean, Russ is, we talked about Hackett going, but Russ is a mess. Like that, like culturally, they're broken. It's not just schematically, it's cultural that they're broken. And the Browns still got a lot of talent. They got Watson returning next year. Bit of a throwaway season for them, honestly, but I can see them coming back and being much more competitive than all the other eliminated playoff teams. Like if you look at all the eliminated playoff teams, Browns, Colts, Broncos, Texans, and the AFC, I think Browns and Broncos come back as the most competitive if the Broncos can fix their cultural issues. I don't think it's hard to correct what they were doing schematically. And then you look at Rams, Falcons, Cards, Bears. I don't think any of those are really coming back as serious contenders next year, but I do think we see quite a bit of shakeup with those organizations that maybe benefit them long term. Do you have any final thoughts on those teams right there where there's coaching changes, agreements, disagreements, or anything that you would like to see over the next week with some of these? We're going to see a bit of a coaching carousel like always, like we always do heading into that last week or right after week 18.
Yeah, for me, it feels like a lot of those coaches, the writing's already on the wall. The Texans, they're just a mess every single year. There has to be some type of change. The Colts, it doesn't sound like Jeff Saturday is going to be the long-term answer, so they're going to be shopping around. Broncos, Hackett's obviously gone now. See what happens there. Broncos are just such a mess. And I mean, what a random outcome for what we thought was going to be a good year for the Denver Broncos.
One of the biggest implosions?
I don't know what's going on. Like, it has to be, if not the biggest. Okay. Like, I mean, you sign a quarterback who, me personally, I thought Russell Wilson was phenomenal. His however many years he was on the Seahawks. I mean, he was one of the best in the league. Top 3, top 4, top 5. Like, you had to consider him there. I remember talking a couple of years ago with my friends. Like, Russell Wilson is one of the best all time, and like not top 5, but I mean, like he was really, really good. And now he goes to Denver, and it just feels like it all falls apart. The team is just feels like they all hate each other, and it's just such a mess. So the Broncos need to figure something out this offseason and really need to make a lot of changes. They can't let Russ go. They're going to pay him way too much if they let him go, and they're kind of stuck with him for another, I don't know, 7-8 years. Like, it feels like it's just a complete mess there. So I don't know if he'll start, but I think he'll start next year. I don't know if he'll start long term, but for those 7 or 8 years, but he's going to be on the team in some fashion unless he decides to retire, which probably won't because he's making too much. Cardinals, Kingsbury's got to go. I mean, I my cousin asked me the other night, it's like, would you want Kingsbury as the Jets OC next year? And I'm like, I don't even think I'd want that. Like, I just can't. I don't love his schemes. I don't like. He just doesn't seem like a good coach to me. He thrived at Texas Tech with Patrick Mahomes. I feel like anyone could thrive with Patrick Mahomes. So no, I don't think Kingsbury is going to be a long-term answer anywhere. And I think the Cardinals are going to have to shop around. And the Bears are the Bears. It feels like they're the bottom of the barrel in the NFC North every year. They went through the Nagy era, and that didn't work out. And it seems like they're up in the air every year. Like, they're looking for new solutions every year, and it feels like they don't find them. So there's a lot of stuff going on this offseason, more than I feel in the past, that's going to go down. And I think it'll be fun to watch how it unfolds and see where the chips fall next year and who's where and who's gone. So that's all I got on that.
Ryan Pace and the Bears. I mean, they're just, what they do with the draft is pitiful every year. They just do not build around young talent very well. So I just think they're going to continue to sit at the bottom of the barrel. But we have seen some teams that are in this playoff race springboard, potentially being a year early, Lions, Jets, etc. So they got to make some big moves. I think both of them need to upgrade a quarterback. Obviously, the Jets do, but I think the Lions do as well. But for now, they're still in the playoff race, and we're going to see what they do this weekend to see if they can actually succeed being a year ahead and sneaking into the wild card. A lot of these matchups, we'll see a couple teams eliminated. We'll see some teams with what's probably going to be a less than 2 or 3% chance going into Week 18 to make the playoffs, and we're going to see probably just 2 or 3 teams going into Week 18 that have a legit chance of locking up the final wild card spot in the AFC. But really, there's 2 wild card spots available in the NFC. And that's one that is going to be interesting to watch if the Giants and Commanders were both to lose this week. But if they both win, then the Giants pretty much have something locked up. I believe they actually lock it up with a win this weekend. So a lot to look out for. I think it's going to be fun, man. I know we've had a longer one than we have in a while. I think next week will be pretty short just because you're going to have so many teams eliminated, and we're going to be it's going to be a big rest week for a lot of teams. So we won't have as much to talk about, but I'm glad we were able to dive into it this week. And as always, I appreciate you jumping on, and you guys know where you can find him. You can find him at RobMcW24. You can find me at Cody Engel. Find us at rosterupmedia.com and at rosterupmedia on all social channels. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope you had a great Christmas. Have a happy new year. We'll see you again next week.